According to a new poll from the Associated Press-NORC Center for Public Affairs Research, President Joe Biden ends his first year in the White House with a clear majority of Americans for the first time disapproving of his handling of the presidency in the face of unrelenting pandemic and roaring inflation.
The poll says 56% of Americans disapprove of how Biden is handling his job as president. As of now, only 28% of Americans say they want Biden to run for a re-election in 2024, including 48% of Democrats. A presidential history professor at Southern Methodist University, Jeffrey Engel, said most chief executives of the U.S. typically see their poll numbers drop between their first and second year in office. The latest survey results are a stark reversal from early in Biden's presidency. In last July, in the similar poll, showed 59% of Americans said they approved of Biden's job performance. His approval rating dipped to 50% by late September in the aftermath of the U.S. military withdrawal from Afghanistan amid surging coronavirus infections and the administration's fitful efforts to push economic infrastructure and tax policies through Congress.
We have faced some of the biggest challenges that we've ever faced in this country these past few years. Challenges to our public health, challenges to our economy, but we're getting through it. Some people may call what's happening now the new normal. I call it a job not yet finished.
U.S. President Joe Biden ends his first year in office as tensions with Russia hit a fever pitch.
He warned his Russian counterpart to choose a diplomatic resolution and to not invade neighboring Ukraine, a message his Secretary of State also is pushing in Kiev this week. VOA White House correspondent Anita Powell reports from Washington.
As the President of the United States spoke on the eve of his first year in office, one nation lurked not so subtly in the background.
Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc. But if they actually do what they're capable of doing with the force amassed on the border, it is going to be a disaster for Russia if they further invade Ukraine, and that our allies and partners are ready to impose severe cost and significant harm on Russia and the Russian economy.
For weeks now, Russian President Vladimir Putin has massed tens of thousands of troops along the Ukrainian border in what Ukraine and the U.S. describe as a clear threat. The two presidents spoke twice by phone in December, and last week diplomatic teams met in 3 European capitals to try to defuse the situation. VOA spoke with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Kyiv, where he met with Ukrainian leadership this week in a show of support.
We've offered Russia a clear choice, a choice between pursuing dialogue and diplomacy on the one hand, or confrontation and consequences on the other hand. And we've just been engaged in an intensive series of diplomatic engagements with Russia, directly between us through the Strategic Stability Dialogue at NATO with the NATO-Russia Council, at the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And my hope remains that Russia will pursue that diplomatic path. It's clearly preferable.
Biden's critics in Congress say he needs to be firm with Putin.
The focus now should be on stopping an invasion, not talking about what happens afterwards. What happens afterwards is not really debatable. The Russians are going to have a very good first day if they invade. After that, the sledding gets very difficult, as they have found out in other places. Occupying a country is very difficult. It's expensive in both blood and treasure. And the president said he has pointed that out to President Putin. And that's something that needs to be underscored as we go forward.
Jeremy Suri, a history professor at the University of Texas at Austin, said that Biden is taking lessons from the Cold War when it comes to communicating with Russia.
One of the lessons from the Cold War is you have to be clear where your lines are so there aren't misperceptions. And so I think it is important. He is making certain that Vladimir Putin does not underestimate the resolve of the United States, but he's also showing that the United States has limited aims. Our goal is not to bring Ukraine into NATO anytime soon, but we will not allow an external power to dictate the future of NATO. So I think having those clear lines is important.
So what now for the two great powers? Blinken meets Friday with his Russian counterpart for another round of diplomacy. Meanwhile, Biden says Putin can decide on his next move as Ukraine watches and waits. Anita Powell, VOA News, Washington.